Hi, friends, and welcome to Season 3 of the School Librarian Learning Network podcast. I'm Steve Tatro, often known as Dr. T Loves Books, and I love talking about all things related to school libraries. I'm an old dog who's always trying to learn new tricks. That's why at each episode of the SLLN podcast, I'll chat with a school librarian about a lesson, program, or activity they love. Hopefully, this can be a place for school librarians to get ideas and find new ways to engage with their students and staff. Speaking of which, I'd love to hear about what you and your friends are doing in your school library. Email me at drtlovesbooks@gmail.com. That's drtlovesbooks@gmail.com to tell me about what you're doing, offer feedback about the SLLN podcast, or to request a podcast sticker. As Amy Herman likes to say, being a guest on a podcast is a great way to show your admins you are engaged in meaningful professional development and leadership in the profession. So drop me a line and let's chat. That being said, the opinions and ideas shared in this podcast by myself and my guests are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. I just like to geek out about school libraries. So without further ado, let's get to this week's episode. Hey everybody, we're back, and once again, I have got Michael Czajkowski here. So the reason that I've got Mike back with us is because we talk every week and we kind of just chat about different stuff. And last time we were chatting, we got into some real deep, interesting ideas. And just as we were talking, we were just bouncing ideas off each other. And we went down some real interesting rabbit holes. And I thought that a lot of them tied into a lot of the stuff I'm seeing in school, like with my students and with my staff. So I wanted to kind of bring some of that conversation here so that other people can maybe kind of get their own ideas about what we're talking about here. So that's sort of the preamble of how we are back and coming back at this.
Where a lot of this started was I, like many people, kind of evaluated how much screen time I had. And I realized I kind of needed a little bit of a digital detox. And I only put some very small parameters in play. But while I was doing that, I started to become really conscious about what my behaviors were with my phone and what I started using technology for. And one of the things that I noticed is experiences. And I found myself more often than not replacing like real life, actual real world experiences with secondhand digital experiences, like quite a bit. And I was really surprised at how often that I found myself doing that.
So you're talking about this idea of experience and how you're sort of taking it in at a remove. And as you were talking that through, you also sort of talked about how lots of people seem to be doing this, where they're gaining so much of their knowledge and their experience almost at a remove. And I think the example you gave was like, if you're trying to learn how to do something, you might watch a video. Like, was that where you were going with that?
Yeah, because I was thinking about like how we used to try new things when we were younger versus how I'm doing it now. Like, I think what a lot of us tend to do now is if you want to try something new, you kind of log into your, video service of choice, and then you watch somebody, usually a skilled professional, perform said task, heavily edited, and it's perfectly done, and they get like the perfect result, and you sort of watch them do the thing. And it doesn't matter. Maybe it's learning how to play guitar. Maybe it's learning how to bake a cake or sketch a drawing. It doesn't matter. But usually by the end of it, you have a couple of choices. And one of them is you can say, well, you know what? That was kind of neat. I think, maybe I'm inspired and I want to try that. But one of the things that I found myself doing was after it was all done, saying to myself, I think I've kind of sort of have an idea what that's like. I have like a commensurate experience. I have a relatable experience. And now I don't know if I need to actually do said thing. And you can kind of find yourself in a trap where you'll do that and then you'll move on to the next thing. And then when you move on to the next thing, you just kind of repeat the pattern. And if you do that enough, you're going to spend a whole lot of time not doing very much. And that was one of the surprising realizations I had.
And so you had mentioned this in, because we've been both talking a little bit about how we can maybe use a little more digital detoxing in our lives because we spend a lot of time online. And it kind of, that idea is always sort of in my head with my students anyway. Like, how do we get them offline a little more? And then you were bringing up this idea of the experience. And like, you got me thinking about how so many of my students will sit and watch Twitch for hours. Or like my nephew will sit and watch people playing games online, won't play the game, just will watch other people play the game. And it kind of got me thinking about parasocial relationships and this idea that sometimes you feel like you know somebody because you've read their content or you've seen them in all their movies or the TV shows or whatever it is. And so in your mind, you build up this like relationship that's not real, but to you, it feels real because you have sort of almost participated in their thought process or their acting or their whatever it is. So you feel like you know the person, but you don't actually. And so this idea of like looking at things online and getting your experience online and having that reaction that you were talking about where you feel like, you know what, I've seen it. I don't know if I need to do this anymore. It's almost like a para-experiential relationship where you're sort of like, you haven't done the thing, but you kind of feel like you've done the thing. And you had brought up this brilliant sort of, not an analogy, but you had sort of compared some of the ways we learn now to when we were younger, if you want to learn something.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was thinking. And I think part of the reason that we can at least see the difference is because we knew what it was like before.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is, and at the risk of sounding like an old man right now, you and I talk a lot and we talk about us growing up Gen X. And I think it comes up a lot for a reason. It's crazy to think, but you and I grew up in a time where it was possible to exhaust all of the entertainment in your house. It was possible. There was only so many television stations. There was only so many radio stations. There was only so many books that you had in your house or on loan from the library, so many board games. And it was possible to exhaust all that and all the conversations with the people in your house. And then you were just left to be bored. And that was okay because when you were bored, that's when you had to try new things. That's when you had to pick up the guitar or try to bake the thing or sketch, the picture or whatever. And the only way you could do it was, well, you had a few ways, but, you could try and do it yourself or get a mentor or join a group, but you had to do the thing to try the thing.
You had to,
it was the only option.
Yeah, you had to take the time to at least seek out, like it's a much harder process to even just seek out where to learn how to do the thing. Or like if you're going in your kitchen to do it, like you've got to spend the time to do it or find that person, have them teach you how to do it. So right away, there's a time investment that I think is lacking for a lot of students or a lot of people these days. Like there's just that instant gratification. Like I can just dive right into this. And I think that it's almost like there's a psychological concept that if you give somebody something for free, they value it less than if you charge them for it.
I agree.
And I think there's some sort of a little bit of an element of that in the experience of you've got to invest time, you've got to invest effort to get the experience. You're going to maybe put more value on that than when you're just able to instantly dive into something with basically no barrier to entry,
Yeah, and I'll even add that you need that time and investment not to get the experience, but to get the result. Like if you wanted to be good at playing a certain song on guitar, you didn't just, now you watch a video and you can see somebody do it almost instantaneously and see, okay, that's what the end result's supposed to be. That can be like an illusion because you don't see all the practice that went into that person being able to create that end result.
Yes.
And we know this because when we grew up and you wanted to try something, the end result was never what you wanted it to be on the first try. And you just kind of had to figure it out and problem solve and do it more. And then eventually you would get to the point where it was good enough. But it was never perfect on the first try. And you didn't expect it to be.
Right. And that ties into this idea that's really big in education, been big the past couple of years about students having grit. And there's sort of this, it's kind of going back and forth, but mostly a lot of educators are looking at their students and saying, my students can't sit and work through something. They get frustrated super easily and give up super easily. And I think there's something connected here to this idea of the para-experiential relationship where, yes, they get frustrated easily because, like you said, they're not exposed to, this is not a thing that's going to happen immediately the first time through. And like, I see it when I try and teach kids research. If they can't put in the perfect search term the first time and get the exact result they want, they get frustrated and they're like, well, I can't find anything I'm looking for. I'm like, yeah, but think of it more like a video game. Like, you don't jump into a video game and assume you're going to beat it all on your first go through. Like, you're going to have setbacks, or you're going to have to start again, and that's okay. Like, that's part of the process.
Exactly.
And I feel like that's something that sort of, that idea, that tenacity, that persistence is something that is sort of being undercut by, again, this just instant availability of whatever you want, you know? Mm-hmm. So it's funny because, again, we had this conversation completely unrelated to school necessarily, but I feel like there's so many just glaring, bright lines that are connecting this to what I'm seeing from my students so often, you know?
One of the things that I really feel that kind of connected to that is the idea that interpreting and analyzing things. You know, so many times I was actually going to the web, same thing, going to like your video talking head of choice to get them to interpret something for me. Or like if I had read something or if I had experienced something, I would go and see what their take is on. And that's perfectly fine to do, but I find myself going to that more and more frequently, to the point where I was relying on that more than actually coming to those conclusions myself. And I think it was at one point where I was saying to myself, you know, I'm still reading quite a bit, but I'm really relying on other people to interpret what I'm reading than I'm interpreting it myself. And that was a slippery slope that I didn't want to go down. Yeah. And I think that's one of those things where now having that availability where you can have just almost everything instantaneously summarized and analyzed, it kind of takes the weight off you to be able to do that. Where, again, I know I sound like an old man, but back when we were younger, you know, you didn't have all these at your fingertips synopsises of things. You didn't have all this analysis ready. You didn't have all these opinions. You experienced something and then you just kind of sat with it for yourself for a while and were able to form your own opinions and put the responsibility on yourself to do so.
Right. And that sort of, the fact that our students and people generally these days are so quick to go to look stuff up instead of sit with it. I think there's there's reasons for it. Psychologically, there's a class that you take as a school librarian. Well, there's a class I had to take as my school librarian training called Human Information Behavior. And it's basically like, how do humans acquire information? What are the patterns we see? And if you boil it all down, it basically comes down to humans are lazy. And that totally makes sense. Like, if you think about it, there's good evolutionary reasons we should be lazy, right? It's, if you're able to do something with less effort, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I feel like so much of our technology has brought us to a point where it's so easy to be lazy that, like, it sounds a little weird to say, but I feel like there used to be a little more effort to being lazy. Like, if you were gonna, if you weren't gonna read the book, but you wanted the synopsis, you had to at least track down a copy of the Cliff Notes, right? So there was, you had to put in at least a little bit of work to do it. Now it's like you jump online and it's right there. And so I understand why people would do that, because, again, our impulse is, how lazy can we be? How little energy can we expend to get the result we want? Which does make sense. But it also, like you were saying, kind of, it's almost like we're reacting to things before we're reflecting on things. Like, not taking that time to just sit with it, to just let it simmer in our brains. And you had talked before about being bored. And I had read a study not too long ago that said boredom is incredibly important to long-term memory and also creativity. But if you're not able to just sit with it, you tend to lose it. And I feel like in giving everybody, like, both of us have our phones with us almost all the time. And I greatly admire that you have been making a serious effort to not just grab your phone instantly, but most people these days have a phone with them, and it's just almost become a reflex that if you've got any thought, any question, anything, you grab your phone and you start to either share your idea or you look up the thing. And there's no pause to just think about, A, is this worth sharing? B, do I really mean this? Or is it just this instantaneous reaction I'm having that 5 minutes from now, 10 minutes from now, once I've had a chance to sit with it, am I going to see this differently? Because I know that happens to me all the time. Like, once I've got that little bit of breather, I'm going to see things, maybe I didn't actually mean what I was thinking there. Maybe I need to back up a little bit and reframe this some. So
Yeah, it can be tough having the technology so close to you. I think one of the things that I told you I did, and this isn't like a huge step, but just a small thing. If you're somebody who just wants to do a real small thing and test your will with technology, if you're sitting reading at home on your couch, just put your cell phone like 6 inches out of reach of your hand. That's all. Just do that. So
Mhm.
you don't have that anxiety of I don't have my phone with me, right? But when it's that just out of reach, you'll realize how often you are reaching for it without even realizing that you're reaching for it. Because
Mhm.
unfortunately, it is kind of like a double-edged sword, right? It's one of those things where if you have a thought where you're inspired by something, and like you said, maybe you want to share it, maybe you don't. Maybe it's just something that you have an idea and a thought, and that leads to another thought, and that leads to a question, and you want to have an answer. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but you'll find yourself impulsively reaching for your phone.
Mhm.
But if you have like a bad thought or a depressing thought, you probably want to be distracted and think of something else, and you will still reach for your phone.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like one of those things where it's, until I sat back and really started to realize how often I was reaching for it, it was really surprising.
Yeah. Yeah. It just becomes so much such a part of your pattern that you don't realize it, you know? It's one of those things that just becomes part of the background.
Mhm,
But then when you make that just a little bit of effort, just a little bit outside of reach,
mhm.
it really helps to bring it to that conscious level, and you may be noticing things that you hadn't noticed before.
Right. But to your point, it makes you rely on it even more because you're just taking it for granted that it's
Mhm.
there if you're looking for additional information or looking to share information.
Mhm.
And I don't know what we did beforehand before we had it. We just, you thought about it, you thought it through, and then you shared it with somebody in person
If you
after
thought
you
it was
thought it
important,
through.
yeah, if you thought it was important enough, you held on to it and you found a way to either pursue it or share it. If it wasn't important enough, you let it go. And now instead, it's every moment of every day, I'm putting out whatever thoughts I have. And I see that with the students too. Like it almost seems like they are constitutionally incapable of just taking things in. They almost can't stop themselves from commenting, either
Mm,
out loud or like feeling like they have to share their reaction. And if they it's almost like if they don't share their reaction, it didn't happen. And it's like, hold on, just hang on to that reaction for just a minute and let's just see.
mhm.
Because we'll be watching movies in class, and this is even going back a couple of years. We'll be watching a movie and they'll say, well, wait a minute, what about what's going to happen with this? And I'm like, if you would wait 30 seconds, you will see the answer to your question. Like maybe we can just focus on what's in front of us instead of, because that's the other thing too. You go from I'm focused on this to now I need to express a thought about this. So you're no longer focused on the original thing. You're now focused
Right,
on the other thing, you know? And
right.
we had talked about multitasking, and like there are studies that show human beings suck at multitasking. We're not good at it. I have students who always swear up and down on a stack of Bibles, no, 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 I always do my work when I've got music playing and the TV on, and then I work on my homework. And I'm like, no wonder your homework is so bad. Like, you can only focus on one thing at a time. And when you switch tasks, there's the psychological term is task switching. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes energy, and that wears you down. Like you don't realize it, but the more you switch tasks, the more you have to just restart and refigure. Where was I a minute ago when I was working on this? Back up. Okay, I think I got it. Let me do that. Oh, wait, now this has got my attention again. Where was I in this? I got to mentally back up and figure out.
Mhm.
And it's such to use a term from our childhood, it's such a soup sandwich of your brain just not being able to do a thing and it just all being mashed together and like not actually getting any good result. Everything's just at best mediocre, you
And,
know?
you can see it too. I don't think you need to run like a deep scientific analysis of it. Like if you're
Mm-hmm.
ever talking to somebody who has their phone and
Mm-hmm.
they're multitasking and they think they're doing a good job of carrying on a conversation, I am yet to find somebody who's typing up something in their phone and multitasking and think they're carrying on with the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
They're not. It's
Yeah.
just kind of stalled and I'm waiting for them to, come back to present time.
100%. So much. And there's one other element that we haven't quite gotten to, but I really want to make sure we get in here because you had sort of been talking about how when you were back in the day, back when we were young, back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, If you wanted to learn something, you had to put in that effort. And not only did you have to put in the effort, and it took a long time, but in putting in that effort, you actually built up sort of a satisfaction from spending that time and investing that time and effort. And like, even if the end result wasn't awesome, you felt good about what you had accomplished because you knew how much time had gone into it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that gets undercut again by these instant experiences and these instant, answers. You don't have that investment of time, effort, energy. And so I feel like even just the satisfaction that you might get from creating something online, from posting an idea, from making a video, from whatever it is, sort of, I don't know if it ever can be as fulfilling as when you're actually doing the thing, when you've got to actually invest that time and take, even if it's just like our conversation. Usually I'm going to tell the audience a little bit of behind the scenes stuff here, because usually I don't do a lot of editing on the conversations. They all usually kind of flow. I'm going to tell the audience that this conversation, I did do some editing because Mikey and I have had this conversation in the past, and there were parts that I screwed up in trying to get us started again. So I have gone in and done a little bit of changing and fiddling with it. But there's definitely going to be a little more, I can tell you right now, I'm going to have a little more buy-in on this particular episode because I'm going to have to go in and spend some time to kind of get it a little more presentable for an audience. And I feel like that's something like, I almost feel like this is also something I see from students. Like, I feel like I don't see them feeling a lot of pride in their accomplishments because so many of their accomplishments are so easy.
Yeah, I think, when you and I were talking, I kind of feel, and maybe I'm overdoing it a little bit, but I always feel that like nowadays you have two different directions you can go in on things, right? You have the actual experience, the actual thing you're going to do, and doing it first person, you doing it for real. And if you're going to do that, we've talked about this. There's going to be a time investment. There's going to be a financial investment. There's probably going to be a little bit of risk because maybe it's not going to go through. It's going to take a lot more planning. It's going to take a lot more time. It's going to take a lot more learning. The reward at the end is going to be much better, but it's going to take a lot more investment. Where on the other hand, you can do this other thing where the reward isn't going to be as good, but the investment's going to be minimal. It's almost like instantaneous. It's always going to be available, probably going to be pretty cheap, something that you can get a pretty quick turnaround on. You don't necessarily have to wait on other people or whatever the case may be. And you're constantly faced with these decisions. And then after a while, it's tough to go back. Right? If you've gotten to the point where you're like, well, I'm just going to have this experience and this I'll just have to do. Maybe I can't go out and hike that trail today, but I can watch somebody else do it and show me all the scenery and show me all the steps and show me what they did and what they packed. And I'll just go for that. But after a while, you can kind of rely on that and you can kind of find yourself falling into that trap. And you can kind of tell yourself this lie that even if it's not better than the actual experience, well, it's better than nothing. It's what. But at the end of the day, if you can put in the extra time, effort, and energy and get the real thing, that's what you'll get. I think, from you and I, from our perspective, like I said, we realized what it was like before, and that was the way to do it. I don't know what it's like to grow up today when you have all these tools available to you just at your fingertips, and using those tools has been your default since day one. I don't know how you go back to see how we did things before. Yeah. I really don't. I don't know what the best approach is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think you're sort of hitting on something important there that sort of illustrates the fact that the more you buy into this, it's undermining your grit. It's undermining your ability to actually go and do the thing. Because if you enough times just go, you know what, good enough is good enough, you're going to basically erode your mental stamina to be able to actually do the thing. So, and it also sort of reinforces that human information behavior, easiest possible route. If I can get it this way, why wouldn't I just do it this way? And if you do it that way enough, again, you're sort of undermining your own motivation. You're undermining your own willingness to go above and beyond. And, I know that there's just so much that is available to us now. And it's almost, I think we've talked before a little bit about decision paralysis and just having too much stuff available to you. Because I I absolutely will sit. Last weekend, I spent an hour going through my Netflix queue and going, okay, which of these things am I never going to actually watch? Because I've got, I don't know how many different, hundreds of things saved in my Netflix queue. That's one service. I think we've got 6 or 7 services. I can't imagine how many. I mean, I've probably got more entertainment stuff queued up somewhere than I could watch in a lifetime. And yet I still will sit down, and instead of actually watching a thing, I will flip through and like, well, not that, not this, not that, and spend more time trying to just pick something than actually doing the thing. And like, I think that maybe plays a little bit into this too, is there's just so much now available at your fingertips that it almost, that decision paralysis kind of takes on its own life. And rather than just doing the thing that is literally in front of you in your physical space, we get wrapped up in this little world of like, oh, I've got to figure out what decision to make, and I don't know which thing I want to do, or I'm just going to let the algorithm automatically pick for me and just let it keep playing stuff, And the problem with that is when every time you make a decision, it takes some mental effort, it takes some mental willpower. And the more decisions you make, the less mental ability you have to continue making decisions and to continue doing stuff. Like, I made about 1 billion decisions today at school, and I came home and I just wanted to just curl up on the couch and just let the television play and not think about anything and not have to do anything. And it's exhausting to have to do that. And so, like, layer that exhaustion on top of trying to convince kids to let go of this device that has sunk its claws into them because it's, built with addictive elements to it on purpose. And it's a way for them to, make their lives easier in some ways and bring them some satisfaction, but none of it's going to be as good as the real thing, but the real thing's harder. So I don't know if it's really worth it. And it becomes such a snowball. Like, it's just so much.
And I think on top of that, the other thing too is, I always think the best decisions that are made are the ones that are made through real world personal experience. Those are the best decisions that are made. And if, like we were talking about before, if a lot of your experiences, you're watching a seasoned professional do something that's highly edited, you're going to look at it and you're going to say, that's easy. That's not complicated. I'll make this decision because I watched this guy do this, and it's that easy. And you're going to maybe grossly oversimplify something, or there's something else that you're not properly going to take into consideration that you should, because you're not doing these things by yourself and getting the firsthand repercussions of them.
Yes.
And then you're making like really bad decisions because you're relying on secondhand information to make firsthand decisions.
And you brought up repercussions. That's such an important element of learning. Like, doing something wrong is one of the best ways to learn, because now that's not the way to do it and I need to do something else. And that tends to stick in our minds better than our successes. Our failures tend to stand out more.
Yeah.
I can remember my failures from my whole lifetime, but the successes seem to go away. So when we're taking away that opportunity to fail almost by just handing you, here's how the expert does it, what are we doing? How are we undermining ourselves and whoever else we're sharing this stuff with?
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And yeah, I mean, it's tough because there's just so much technology out there, and it's tough to turn it off. That's the problem. It is really tough to turn it off. I think I told you, from my perspective and my use, one of the reasons that I really kind of took a deep dive and said, how much of this do I really need to keep having in my life, was that I was telling myself that I was using a lot of the applications I was using as learning applications. And I was learning a lot of different stuff about books I was reading and different types of philosophies and whatever else you have. But after a while, I was questioning myself, like how much I was retaining of what I was listening to. And some of them I was retaining really well. And other things, not so much. I would listen to like a whole bunch of stuff and really kind of question myself and be like, I couldn't really take away some of the main points from that. So what was I doing? Well, it wasn't that I was distracted or wasn't actively listening. I was actually seeking out the technology just because I was looking for the company. And that was it. I was just looking for somebody in my ear while I was doing dishes to talk about the things that I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing that more and more and more. And finally I said, well, wait a minute. Using it for a learning experience is one thing. Learning it just to have company, well, I mean, that can get out of hand pretty quickly. So I had to find a way to kind of, draw a dividing line on that. Still trying to figure out the best way to do that. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of the problem. And you and I have talked about this before. The issue is that device is an entertainment device, but it is also a functional device. There's no way to separate the two.
Mm-hmm.
There really isn't. And, I don't know how you do it. There's this movement now where people use what they call dumb phones,
Mm.
where, basically it's just phone calls and text messages and that's
Mm-hmm.
it. And I don't like having my phone with me all the time, but it does some things that are really helpful in terms of checking calendars, checking the weather. I can look at, the security system on my house if I'm away from home. It
Mm-hmm.
does all these like really valuable things that are great that I don't want to get rid of, but it's very difficult to separate the entertainment device from the actual tool
Yeah.
device. I've actually tried it. I've tried to separate them and like, have the fun stuff on one device and have the functional stuff on another. Um, and it was too difficult. I just got kind of frustrated with it. And it's like, look, it is what it is. It's very difficult to limit. It really is.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of it too is just the unwillingness to sit in silence, the unwillingness we talked about, like boredom is important. And we have reached this place. I have reached a place, and I'm not going to speak for everybody, but I feel like this seems like a fairly common experience that if there's silence, if I'm not doing something, I feel like I'm wasting time or I'm not,
Mm.
maybe using my day the best way I can. So like on my way to work, I've got podcasts playing. During lunch, I've got, something going. I've got a video going that I can learn from. On my way home, more podcasts. When I'm cutting the lawn, I've got podcasts going. And like, I love listening to podcasts. I love learning. But like you're saying, is there a place for just being quiet and being reflective and maybe just having my own thoughts and figuring out what I want to think about for all of this stuff? You had brought up the idea of the one question or the when you're using a device,
Yeah.
asking yourself, if you would talk about
Yeah.
that a little,
One of the
I
things,
love this.
and again, this is just, I've been trying anything I can to just kind of do this better. Before I mention that, let me just say,
Uh-huh.
for what you're doing, constantly listening to podcasts, I'm the king of constantly listening to podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, if you have a certain routine that you listen to podcasts to, maybe just change one of them. Like for me, I walk every morning. So I took them out for the morning walk every day. And then you realize, oh, it's not bad. Like it's okay to be alone with my thoughts for a little bit. And you can, and trust me, it can be scary, I know, but then you find out it's okay. And then maybe you say, I'm not gonna, listen to anything while I walk, but also like if I gotta go to the store, I'll just turn off the radio and just like, see where my brain logically goes. You'd be
Wait,
surprised.
before we go to the one question, I want to come back to that, but you're saying this and it's sort of got me thinking like, letting podcasts go. I have, and I don't know, maybe this just might be me. It just might be my weird brain, but I find that when I've got a podcast queue, like, because my podcasts automatically download to my phone. And so when I want to play them, they're just ready to go. I find that when I've got that queue, the longer my queue gets, the more anxious I feel that like I haven't gotten through. How am I going to get through all these podcasts? Like I want to listen to all these. I decided I was going to download them. So where do I find the time? Like now I've got to make up a chore that I can put in my headphones so I can listen to my podcast. And it's like adds to my, I love the podcast, don't get me wrong, but it definitely adds this little note of anxiety when I see, oh my gosh, I've got 70 podcasts. Where am I going to find 70 hours to sit down and go through and listen to all this? So
Yeah.
like we're almost sabotaging myself with my attempts to not have a spare moment and adding this extra element of anxiety to the day because if I could just let that go, it wouldn't be any worse. Wouldn't be
And
any
I know,
worse off.
and look, everybody is different, but for me, one of the things that I started to realize that one of the things that caused me anxiety is throughout my day, I always felt like my own voice in my own head was competing against a lot of other exterior noise.
Mm,
And I got to tell you, if you spend, at least for me, you spend a little bit of time getting rid of all the noise and making sure that your voice is the loudest voice in your own head, For me, that relieved a lot of anxiety. It felt like it was not competing with a lot of unnecessary distraction.
Yeah.
And that kind of helped me. But it's a simple enough experiment to do for anybody to just try. Even 15 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, half an hour a day. Just try it and see where it brings you.
I love that idea of trying to make your own voice louder in your head because especially with social media, I think it's so easy to focus on, oh my gosh, this person's, is saying these so funny things, these smart things, they've got this amazing thing happen in their life. And I think we almost get those parasocial relationships become voices in our head of I'm not measuring up.
Yep.
I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
And it does sort of drown out your own voice, or it even turns your own voice against you a little bit, it almost makes you.
In my perspective, it puts your voice in the defensive kind of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Huh.
Yeah.
Man.
Rather than you being the narrator of what's going on, you've all of a sudden become the color commentator of somebody else's narrative,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I like that. All right. So yes, absolutely 100%. I don't want to lose, though, your idea of what's your one question when you're using your device.
Yeah, and that was the one thing that I tried to do is one of the things to just use my phone more responsibly is every time is, first of all, like I said, be conscious of when you are reaching for it because that in and of itself is really hard. It's almost like people that, like me, sometimes I eat and graze and don't even realize I'm doing it. Same thing with the phone. You just have to realize that you're picking it up. And the other thing is when you pick it up, maybe just constantly ask yourself, what question am I trying to answer by picking this up? Why am I picking this up? Because if it's something simple as like, I just need to know if it's raining this afternoon so I can make a plan accordingly, that's easy. You're going to pick it up and look, do I want to know if the Red Sox won yesterday because I'm going to talk to somebody later and I want to have that in my back pocket. Yep. You look up and you put it down. But if you're picking it up and you don't know why and there's no question to answer, I think your question is, I really want to be distracted right now, and I need something to distract me from where I am. And that can be hard, but I think those are the things that I would try and limit picking it up. If I didn't have a definitive intent for picking up. And again, it's easier said than done. If anybody figures it out, let me know. But these are some of the small things that I tried to get a little better.
Well, I love that idea of having that intent in the use because I am absolutely you talk about just grazing on, the snacks that are in front of you. I will sit down at the TV at night and just the TV's on and something's playing and I'm half paying attention to that and I'm half paying attention to the laptop in my lap and I'm sort of I'm just browsing Reddit or I'm, browsing these different sites and just Reddit particularly has become such a horrible time suck and just vortex of doom for me. Not even that I'm necessarily doom scrolling on it, but or social media. If I go on Bluesky and I just start going through, trying to find the end of a post or because there is no end. They just endlessly scroll.
Yeah.
And it just becomes this, okay, I read that. Let's read the next one. 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 And it's just literally an unending list. And again, part of my brain is I need to get to the end of the list or I need to find a stopping place. And there is no stopping place. It's just more and more and more and more and more, So it is like just having a bag of chips and just eating out of the bag instead of taking out a serving and putting a serving in a bowl.
Exactly.
And now, okay, if I have a bowl, I know I'm only eating this much and I'm not if I mindlessly eat them, oh, well, too bad. You went through your bowl. And I think that's part of the problem with the internet is it's so, or, whatever device you have is that there is no bowl, if you don't take that time.
Up to you. It's left up to you. And that is the hard part to figure out where to draw that line.
Yeah.
It really is a challenge. It really is.
Bottomless bag of chips, man. Well, yeah, like I said, we had this conversation. Now, again, audience, we don't have this kind of conversation all the time, okay? Usually we talk about, here's what I'm reading this week, here's what I was watching on TV this week. But this one was just, we went down some interesting avenues, and I really wanted to share because Mikey just was just making my head spin with some of these thought provokers that have me rethinking some of the ways I do things in my own personal life, but also kind of connecting that with what do I do in school with the students? And is there something here I can take away and maybe help them as well as help myself? So before we wrap it up, loop back for just a second. You had mentioned this before, and I just want to bring back and underline a little bit. You had talked about how sometimes when you're reading something or you're watching something and you instantly went out and tried to find the opinions about it or the analysis of it,
Yeah.
instead of just kind of taking that time to think it through first. And we had originally, you had kind of talked about this as sort of stepping away from your own opportunity to just reflect and form your own opinions about it.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of times I'll read something or watch something and I won't quite know how I feel about it right away. Like I'll finish it and be like, I mean, I like this, but I didn't like that. And if the first impulse is, I don't know how I feel, so I'm going to see what somebody else thinks, or I'm going to see what somebody else feels about it. It's almost like you're not just invalidating your own opinion, but you're just skipping over having an opinion altogether.
Yeah, I agree. And that was one of the things that I found myself doing is if I was reading something or watching something, I was kind of concerned with how quickly I was looking for people to do review or analysis after I had watched it. It was pretty soon after, and I started to realize I wasn't making, and I couldn't possibly form a good opinion or analysis on whatever I was reading in that short a period of time. So then I realized I was relying on other people to do that for me. And then it started to get even worse because then I started to take people's opinions into account for what I should be reading before I read it. Not getting spoilers, but saying, is this worth me investigating? Let me take a look and see what this person has to say. And in the meantime, I should be able to look at it and be like, this sounds interesting. The writer's fairly reliable, fairly established. I enjoy the subject matter. Let me see what they do. And it's okay to read like really good books that support your opinion. It's also good to read books that don't support your opinion so you yourself can firm up your own opinions. And I think I was falling into this trap where I really kind of wanted to find stuff that I aligned with. And I said, if that happens, what do you really learn? You know, you want to have your ideas tested and you want to be able to go in and not have somebody's preconceived notion that, oh my God, this is great. You know, it was great. I loved it, because you're going to go in and you're going to start already looking at this work through somebody else's lens before it even started. So I realized I was having an issue not even after I had finished something, but before I even started it. And that's when I was like, wait a minute, I really have to kind of put some parameters in here so I can really kind of think about this stuff myself, absorb it myself, come up with an opinion myself, then go see what other people have to say and then test it against that. Again, it's one of those things where you and I know what it was like before, you know, so we know the difference. But again, if I was growing up in this day and age and that was all I ever knew, I'm not sure how I'd get around that. I have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like you're saying, if you're not taking the time to just sort of marinate in your thoughts about it and form your own opinions about it, and are just kind of picking up, hoovering up whatever other people have said, how do you even know what you really like? How do you even know what does or doesn't align with your own thoughts if all you're doing is taking other people's thoughts and ideas? And again, yeah, it's the easy path. And so it's right there. It's simple. Thinking is hard work. Like,
Yeah.
it sounds silly, but I know that the days when I really have to think hard about stuff, I come home tired. Like, it will physically drain you as well as be mentally draining.
Yeah.
And so I get why people might want to skip over that part. But like we're saying, there's a value in having that experience, in having the actual tiredness, in having the actual thought process. And, you know, it's just, it scares me to think that there may be a generation, an entire generation, that's sort of skipping over so much of the actual experience in favor of the para-experience.
And getting those experiences through parasocial relationships. Because I know a lot of the times when people look to have an opinion on something, they may not necessarily go towards an expert or somebody who, you know, is really well versed in these things. They may just go to a familiar face that they know. on the web and just
Yeah.
say, I want to know what this person's take is because I identify with this person. And I think whatever that person thinks, I'm going to identify with that. And sometimes that's the first stop that they'll go to get their information. And, the decisions we make are only as good as the information that we base them
on. Well, in addition to that, there's also sort of that parasocial element of, I see so many students who are just, they do not want to talk to other human beings. Like they want to text, they want to social message. And there's almost not even a reluctance, almost a fear of having interactions with other people. And they've got this tool that lets them communicate in other ways so that they don't necessarily have to have a face-to-face conversation. But how is that undermining their social skills? So like take that idea and then apply it to their experiences of actual events. And then, boy, it really starts to get scary.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be, conversation can be a lost art. Yeah. These days it really can, because a lot of communication through technology takes place in just very short bites. So people may not be used to having long form conversations. They may be used to listening to them through podcasts, but they may not be used to having them themselves. And those are two very different things.
I will say the irony of us talking about parasocial relationships and how podcasts give us the para experience, but not the actual experience, is not lost on me.
Yeah.
That is in my brain. But I hope other people find, or I hope people find even a quarter of what we've been talking about as marginally interesting as I'm finding it, because I just think there's so much richness to this conversation and so many ideas that are so important that are so easy to gloss over. And I think, again, part of it is there's just so much going on that it's easy to forget. I think it's easy to forget that we should be taking time to stop and think and experience, that we should be giving ourselves boredom, that we should be giving ourselves just that freedom to mentally breathe without having to feel like we have to constantly be marinating in some sort of input.
Yeah. And I think, to each their own, whatever anybody wants to do. But I found that if you start off in smaller bites, it's not as overwhelming. Just find small chunks of your day where you can give yourself that quiet time. I mean, if time allows. I mean, I understand that we all live very busy, hectic lives. But like I said, even something is when you're alone in the car or when you're cutting the grass or whatever, just try and give yourself a little bit of that headspace. And if it works for you, then just try and incorporate a little more and then see how it goes.
Love it. I think that's a great place for us to wrap things up. Great lesson for us to have in mind as we are walking away from this podcast. Maybe after this podcast, we just sit in silence for a little while.
I love it.
Well, thanks again, Mike. I really appreciate when you come and share. It's always, I love having the outside perspective, and this was just such a real thought-provoker for me. So thanks so much for bringing it.
Well, thank you for having me. Always appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the SLLN podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for the episode. They feature links to resources shared by our guest, as well as ways to keep in touch with them, and links to the book break titles. I'd love to hear from you. If you have feedback, a comment, an idea, a question, or something you want to share, you can email drtlovesbooks@gmail.com. That's drtlovesbooks@gmail.com. Know a librarian with something we could learn from? Let us know. Until next time, be good, be safe, and be well.